Hey everyone, welcome back. This series has been on the back burner for some time now, so I figured it was time to get back to it. Last time we covered the article that Stephen Meyer managed to get published in an old but little known scientific journal and the controversy that followed that. This time we're going to look at the list that this individual gives in his tweet thread. The rest of it, I should say. Now, I've been through all these articles, breezed through them as much as I could, because some of these are behind a paywall, and the entire list from the Discovery Institute is kind of repeating the same thing over and over, but what he's provided here is going to be enough for me to prove my point, that either these articles are not actually peer-reviewed or that they don't actually say what he thinks they do. I want to move this along, so we're going to touch on each of these articles briefly to show where the flaws are and why these don't actually work as he intends. So let's get started with that. Starting off with estimating the prevalence of protein sequences adopting functional enzyme folds by Douglas Axe from ScienceDirect.com. ScienceDirect is not a journal, it's a database for scientific and medical journals, some of which are better than others. This one is a bit on the old side, as it was received in November 03, accepted in June of 04, and made available the following month. This is just the abstract, as the whole thing is behind a paywall, but if you read through the technical jargon, it's saying that based on the experiment they conducted, the overall prevalence of protein sequences performing a specific function by any domain-sized fold may be as low as 1 in 10 to the 77th power, adding to the body of evidence that functional folds require highly extraordinary sequences. It is important to note that despite the technical jargon and the conclusions he came to, that at no point is a directed intelligence implied or explicitly stated as being needed, simply that the odds of it happening at all are small. I need to point out, though, that it does not in any way point to a designing agency. Next, we have Simulating Evolution by Gene Duplication of Protein Features that Require Multiple Amino Acid Residues by Michael Behe and David Snoke. Protein Science is actually a peer-reviewed journal. This is an older reference too, being from 04. Basically, what we have here is an investigation of the likelihood that duplication of a gene will be a viable path to further mutations that may lead to a trait natural selection can favor. This is a numbers game again and excludes for the most part genetic recombination, which would exclude sexually reproducing organisms and severely limit the rate of mutation. If a gene mutates, the parent population will generally suppress the aberration, whether it's positive or negative. I'm not saying that natural selection would not favor it if it provided a beneficial effect, and it is true that several mutations may be needed to produce any noticeable effect in expression. However, that restriction is not as heavy in an offshoot group that is separated for one reason or another from the ancestral group. To top it off, duplication is not the only genetic mechanism evolution uses, though it is certainly not a novel one. Recombination, genetic drift, and a few others make evolution faster overall than is implied here, and this is only looking at one aspect, the duplication. Again, no intelligent agency is indicated, implied, or required in this paper. Moving on. This is The Search for a Search, Measuring the Information Cost of Higher Level Search by William Dembski and Robert Marks. This appeared in the Journal of Advanced Computational Intelligence and Intelligent Informatics. It's more recent, being from 2010, and is a peer-reviewed journal that focuses specifically on computer technology. This article proposes a better search algorithm and is therefore irrelevant to any discussion on intelligent design as it pertains to a god. Next, The Evolutionary Accessibility of New Enzymes Functions, a case study from the biotin pathway by Ann Gauger and Douglas Axe. This appeared in volume 2011 of Biocomplexity. Now, this is not a peer-reviewed journal in any sense of the term. The full article is behind a paywall, so I only have access to the abstract. It discusses homologous enzymes and says that in their investigations they determined that in order for a specific mutation they tested for to occur, the time needed would be older than the age of the Earth. Now, admittedly, my understanding of genetics as it pertains to enzymes isn't the best. I specialize in aviation. But it seems to me that testing for a single mutation to get an enzyme that is what they are looking for specifically, with no mention of what the enzymes are supposed to do, or if the functions are even related, it seems a bit suspect to me. I'm not dismissing this because I don't really understand it, but because it sounds suspect to me and I would need a better description of what's actually going on. Either way, I don't find this particularly compelling based on what I do know of genetics. This is another article from Biocomplexity, which is again not a recognized peer-reviewed journal, called Reductive Evolution Can Prevent Populations from Taking Simple Adaptive Paths to Higher Fitness, by Ann Gallagher, Stephanie Ebert, Pamela Fahey, and Ralph Selk. This is another article that shows that they don't really know what they're talking about in biology by asserting that evolution is essentially a choice for the organism. By giving E. coli a double mutated gene that makes them unable to biosynthesize tryptophan, and then being surprised that when in a tryptophan limited environment, instead of ditching the mutated genes completely, they acquired mutations that reduced the expression of these genes. In that environment, the genes became essentially neutral, offering no real beneficial or detrimental effect, so it is allowed to simply accumulate with no effect on the organism. Genes aren't something like an eye in a fish that live in an environment with no light. Genes aren't taking up many resources, so they simply accumulate if they have no negative effect. Okay, so that leaves us with two left from his list in the tweet. Let's knock those out. The Wow Signal of the Terrestrial Genetic Code by Vladimir Sherbek, I'm pretty sure I butchered that name, and Maxim Melkov, I probably also butchered that name too, is found at Science Direct again and is dated at 2013. One of the more recent we've seen, but still slightly out of date. And this one is kind of weird, and I get the feeling that these guys may take Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods a bit too seriously. What these guys are saying is that terrestrial DNA bears an intelligent signal of sorts. This hinges on the idea they touch on earlier in the article that DNA, if left in a static state, can retain its code indefinitely. The problem is you won't find static DNA on Earth because DNA changes in non-trivial ways from person to person and life form to life form due to recombination during reproduction and mutations. So we know that if they are looking for this signal in anything on Earth, they won't find it. What they see are things that look like patterns but are evidently incidental. DNA is full of what is essentially junk, like broken genes in us that once controlled the formation of massive jaw muscles and extra musculature in general as an example, and this is well known in genetics. Finally, we have Dissecting Darwinism by Joseph Kuhn from the Proceedings of Baylor University Medical Center in 2012. This is also not peer-reviewed. Baylor is a private Christian university. The article is simply an opinion piece that strawmans evolution with 3 points. First, that evolution does not explain the origins of DNA. The theory of evolution was never meant to do that, nor does it investigate the origin of life, and frankly, that is irrelevant to the subject of evolution. Second, that the current understanding we have doesn't account for the irreducible complexity of cells, which is a nonsense claim I've already covered, and the primary argument that was rejected by actual peer review evidence in Kitzmiller versus Dover. Third, that there is a lack of transitional species data to account for the multitude of changes involved in the transition. In this case, they want to see each and every transition from point A to point B with no gaps, which is simply unreasonable to expect. This in its entirety is a long and drawn-out retelling of Stephen Meyer's misunderstanding of evolution, biology, and paleontology from the paper we talked about last time, which has been debunked by people in the relevant fields already, so I won't go over that again. So, as we can see, as I expected, these articles are either not saying what he thinks they are, or they are not actually peer-reviewed. The authors of all these articles will be the last thing that I cover in this series, so I won't go into their credentials, affiliations, and whatnot here. We have a bit of time here, however, in this video, so I want to take a few minutes to touch on the next part of his thread. The teleological or watchmaker argument and his cosmological argument, which is the Kalam in this case. So the watchmaker argument is pretty straightforward. You see a watch, a building, or something else man-made, and you would know that someone created it. The problem is that this is only applicable to things that are not alive. Trying to apply that design thought process to life immediately sets up the question begging of who or what is this creative force, which of course is supposed to be God, even though God isn't evidently involved or indicated in any aspect of biology. Same with his cosmological argument. Yes, the universe had a cause. No, we don't know what it was that started the universe, so claiming that a super powerful God did it is something you couldn't possibly know, and is an invalid hypothesis since a God is supernatural, untestable, and unfalsifiable. So it falls outside the realm of science and is dismissed as a possibility. That's it for now. Next time, we're going to take a look at the next section of his thread, which deals with cosmology and specifically the distant starlight theory.